Okay, so today I'm going to go over how to do a brake job on Jeeps from this era. So what you're first going to want to do is jack the car up, obviously, and I like to put it on jack stands so I don't kill myself to death. We'll get under here, I'll note the jack points. Now, get our light. Some people like to jack up right there in the middle and try and pick the thing all up at once. I don't really like that because the jack is usually touching the pan in some sort of a way, and I really don't want to dent up the pan or, you know, press it up into the oil pump pickup tube or anything of that nature. So I go ahead and jack it up one side at a time. Or I jack to get the driver's side up, as I can just go right under the pumpkin here. But to do the passenger side, I just, if you can see here, there we go, I grab onto the axle. So I think that's the best means of jacking it up, but I'm not going to jack this side up yet, just because I'm going to go ahead and break these nuts free, these lug nuts. And one thing I want to mention about these lug nuts on these Chryslers is that these are stainless steel covers over the lug nuts, and if you use an impact, you run the risk of messing these up so that you can't get them off. So you always want to go ahead and use a standard socket wrench, or even better yet, a breaker bar. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and use. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get these just broke loose, and then I'll jack it up and take them all the way off. Sometimes they can be tighter, depending on how long they've been on there, or who put them on, or, you know, but hopefully they're about this tight and this easy to take apart. And obviously you don't need to jack it up to the moon, just enough to get the wheel off the ground. And so where I like to put my jack stands on the front is right here. So we'll run this down, slide this in, up we go. So it'll follow the contour right there. And we'll ease her down on it. You don't want to leave a vehicle up on a jack, it's just hard on the jack, so let it down nice and gently, and now we can go ahead and pull our wheel off. Alright, so these should be pretty loose where you can really just run them off. Pull our wheel back so it gets the pressure off the lug nuts. Off they come. Now this wheel came right off, but sometimes when they don't come off, you just have to stand up and give the wheel a little kick right up here in this region. When you do this, it should break the wheel loose from its where it's froze to the hub. So anyway, this one just came right off, luckily. That fell down nice and easy. And now we'll get to taking the brake apart. So you can move it to where you can work on it better. So we're going to come in it from this angle. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and take our caliper off here. And how you do this is you remove these two bolts, and they should come out, and your caliper should come out and off. So we'll go ahead and do that. Generally you don't want to hammer on your socket wrenches, but I can take my tools in, or my you know, anything that has a ratcheting mechanism like these wrenches, but you know, they're Craftsman, I can get them replaced if they break. So anyway, since I'm looking at it, I need to turn it in the counterclockwise position. So on the passenger side, that means pound it in this direction. Sometimes they can be seized pretty good, and sometimes they come apart relatively easily, but you generally always need to hammer them. Get a hammer on there, knock them loose. Now what I'm going to do before I go ahead and remove this caliper is I'm going to take this wire, or you can use a bungee strap. I'm going to tie it up in this spring. Now what I'm going to use this for is that when I remove my caliper, I don't want it to be hanging and dangling by the rubber brake line, because you can damage them. So generally they should come apart pretty good with prying. Now if you want to check your brakes before you were going to take it all apart and replace them, you could take your wheel off and look in here, and you can see the brake pad right there, as this is the rotor and this is the backing of the pad. You can see the brake pad and how much you have. So on these I really don't have that much, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it apart. So you can just go right into here from this angle and just give it a good pry, and go on the other side and give it a good pry, you know, pivot off your caliper mount. Just kind of pry back and forth, and eventually it should come loose. So there we go. Now we're going to use our wire here that we put up in the spring to tie off our caliper here, so that it doesn't dangle down and damage your brake line. So and then we're just going to go ahead and pop our pads out. Sometimes they can be a little tricky, especially on this outer side. You just got to kind of work them back and forth. So that one's not that bad, but on the other hand, this one was getting pretty low. As you can see, that's pretty thin. So anyway, conventionally from this point, you would go on to remove these two extra bolts and pull this housing off, so that you could take your rotor in and either get a new rotor or have your rotor turned down. Now I don't have that bad of grooves in this rotor, and I only drive this vehicle 5,000 miles a year, and it has 160,000 miles on it, so I'm not going to worry about it per se. So it's just my winter vehicle. But I definitely recommend either getting new rotors or always getting your rotors turned. And your rotors can get turned down to a nice finished service pretty cheaply at any most all automotive stores. I know O'Reilly's does it for sure. But if I was going to remove this, I'd have to remove this caliper carrier here, and I'd have to take this bolt out here as well as this bolt out down here. You don't want to take these other bolts out. You want to get these ones. So you should be using an 18 millimeter to get those. If you're using anything different, you got the wrong one. So anyway, I'm just going to go ahead and replace my pads and push my calipers back together, and I'll be good to go. Now, you really want to be careful with these Chrysler calipers, especially when you're pushing these caliper pistons back, because they're actually not even metal. I think they're some sort of ceramic, so you can break them really easy. You know, there are tools to push these back, but if you're just doing it at home like I am and not at a shop like I'd usually do them, what I'm going to do is just take something that's flat and can go over the hole and place it over, and then I'm going to place my C-clamp over this. Now the reason you don't want to run your C-clamp down in there is because the hole gets progressively smaller and smaller, and eventually your C-clamp will wedge into the sides and it'll crack your piston if you try and run them in that way. So I'm going to go ahead and get our C-clamp assembly going here. And try and slide this on over. And you want to be mindful with your C-clamp where it is on the back of your caliper, because you don't want to be smashing into some lines or anything of that nature, as you can damage them. So we're going to just run this back in nice and slow, like you see here. Just nice and slow, and then we'll do the other one. And once they get to a bottom and they feel like they've bottomed out, you don't want to force them. Once it gets slightly tough, just back off. They should be all the way down and seated. And then move on to your next one. So we'll go ahead again and run this piston in nice and slow. You don't want to do it too fast and blow it out. And before you do this, you want to take the cap off your reservoir on your brake master cylinder, because oftentimes as your brakes wear down, your brake fluid will go down, because more of your brake fluid is in these calipers. So if you add fluid when your brakes are worn, you're going to want to be mindful of that, because it's going to push all that fluid back out and you're going to have an overfilled situation. So you don't want to blow anything up there. So you want to watch that. So we feel a little bit of resistance, and there we go. Just let it fall on out of there. So, and sometimes these rubber rings around the side can get messed up, and you want to be mindful of that and get those all popped back into the way they're supposed to be. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and install our pads now, and usually get new clips here, but they're kind of a hassle to put on, really, and if yours aren't rusted out or show any signs of pitting or anything of that nature, I'd just go ahead and leave them on there. But again, if this was a newer vehicle that I drove more often, I'd probably change them. So I'm going to leave that up to you. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and these front ones are pretty simple. They just slide right in here like so. And then I'm going to take our caliper that we got tied up here. You don't want to let that drop when you cut it loose. The wire's being kind of ornery there. So then, go ahead and slide that on. Before you do this, you want to make sure that these guides still move in and out. That's pretty important. I just messed with these brakes not too long ago, as I had the front end apart, so I greased them up good. But oftentimes people like to pull these out and grease them up, but we're gonna just leave that be for now. So notice with our caliper pressed back, it slid right up in there, and then we can just go ahead and should be able to get these fingers started. Oftentimes the bottom one is easier to get started before the top one for whatever reason with brakes. Alright, so now we're just going to go ahead and get these tightened down. They don't need to be gorilla tight, but you don't want them to spin loose either. You may want to put a little bit of grease on them just so they don't seize up from rust in the future. So I've also done that. Alright, those should be tight. You want to make sure that you remove your wire or whatever you had holding up your calipers so it doesn't get into your wheel at a later date. Pull that one out of there, and now we're going to go ahead and put the wheel back on and snug the lug nuts back down. I'm not going to do a final tightening because I need the wheels to be slightly touching the ground to get a full torque on them. But now, after getting this done, I'll put this back together and we'll move on to the back wheel now. Now, how I prefer to jack the back of these Jeeps up is just like any conventional vehicle. So I just get my jack turned right, and I'm going to run that in right into the center of the pumpkin so I can lift the whole rear end at one time. And then when I get it lifted up, I like to have my jack stands right in this orientation where they'll slide right in between, because if you try and put them in farther, they'll oftentimes hit on this bar here and bend it up. And you can get around it, but it's just not really as safe, so I prefer to put them out here, and then you get the weight distributed to the four corners anyhow that way. So anyway, that's pretty much how you jack up the rear end of the Jeep. Okay, so moving on to our rear brake now. What we first need to remove, pretty dirty here on this Jeep, is this little clip here, and it can kind of be a pain sometimes, but generally if you work it around enough, a pair of pliers, it'll break loose. You want to note the placement of this as well. Alright, there it is. So this next part's a little interesting. If we see back here, we have kind of the same orientation as the front, but there'll be these little black caps usually. There should be one there, and you can really see this one good here. And what you do is you get in here with a screwdriver. It's good to use two hands, but I'm holding the recorder here. But you want to pop that cap off, and inside there will be kind of a hex-headed deal that looks like this, and it's a 7mm is what I have that goes in there for me. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and pop those two caps off and break it loose, and this caliper should come off just the same as the front. Okay, we'll get our other cap. There's that. And then drop this baby in here. Give it a few taps and break that loose. Should be good to go. Alright, one note I want to make with these that sometimes can be a little tricky is if you can see these threads right here. When you take these out, sometimes it still stays in the hole where you can't really get these pulled apart. So what you want to do is grab onto the threads or your screwdriver and kind of push the bolt kind of back and out of the way. So we'll do this to this side as well. So see how it's pushed back and out of the way, and it's always a good idea to pull these out and grease them up good, because they're kind of that floating caliper idea, so it's good to keep those good and lubricated. So once we remove that, our caliper should come right out. So these can be a little tricky on the back. Alright. And then usually you can pull this out right here. Usually you can set these on this rear control arm type deal. So now these brakes look pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and replace them for the sake of the video and because I got them free on warranty. I'm going to go ahead and get in here to our metal stock. And our C-clamp. So again, make sure you're not running your C-clamp into anything important in the back of your caliper. Now we're just going to go ahead and gently push our piston back. Okay, seems to be all the way back in its spot, so the rubber is good where it's not getting pinched. Again, like I mentioned on the front, you want to make sure this rubber is back folded into its right position. And again, like I also said, is with that master cylinder, with that reservoir, you want to take the cap off, and that's, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's where you add brake fluid, because that fluid needs to bleed back in there, and sometimes the air can't escape, so you get kind of like a vapor lock. So you want to have that cap off while you perform all of this. So we're going to let that hang there for the time being, and we're going to get our new brakes out and put them on. Alright, so our brakes go in this orientation like that, like so. So I'm going to go ahead and they're designed to press into the ceramic piston here. So we're going to go ahead and get that pressed in like so. We're going to take our other caliper and just, our other pad, and just set it on here. Okay. Now, we need to run our free float screws back in, or bolts. So they're a little tricky. But I'll always start with the bottom one, because it's the one that's more inclined to go in. And you want to make sure you get both of them started before you get either one of them snug. So that's always a good rule of thumb. Alright, now that they're both in there, I can go ahead and run this one all the way down, and then move to this one, run it all the way down, and we'll put our little spring clip on and we'll be done. We can throw our wheels back on and away we go. Alright. And if you remember our spring clip, it'll go under here, under your caliper guide. You can easily put it in one hole and put it in the other. Then you want to take your pliers here and kind of grab onto it, and you always want to wear safety glasses when you're working with this type of stuff. Like I said, some of them are better than others. Okay, so the trick with this one in particular was to get this side started a little bit, just barely in first, and then put this other side in. And we're just going to kind of lightly tap it into place. Alright, and there you have it. And again, same deal with the rotors as on the front. These are in better shape, but still I always recommend either getting them turned or putting new rotors on. But like I said, this is just a beater vehicle for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and reuse them as is, because I only drive this car 5,000 miles a year. But anyway, you don't want to forget to replace your black caps onto each of those guides. So alright, we're ready to put the tires on, and then let the jack down to where the wheels are just barely touching the ground and torque them down. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and throw our wheel on here, line up the plug nuts, chuck her right on there. I always like to go ahead and snug my bottom lug nut down to kind of helps keep the wheel in place. So, like so. And you don't want to tighten any of these to any certain point, without tightening the other ones. You want to run them down all even, because that's kind of how they're set up to align. They all ran down at the same time, so as you see, as I put this one on, then this one got loose, so that's just kind of how it is. That's why you need to do it in that way. So I'm going to go ahead and go in the natural star pattern here. That one's ran in. That one's ran in. And finally, that one's ran in. So now it's safe to let it drop down off the jack just enough so the wheel here touches the ground, and we can put a good torque on these. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is drive the vehicle around for 20 minutes and come back and torque them one more time. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and let it down and get that done. Okay. Once your brake job's completed, the last thing you want to do is pump up your brake pedal, because as you can see, it goes straight to the floor here. So if you were to start up your car and pushing your brake pedal and put it in reverse, it would just take off. So once you finish a brake job, you want to make sure that you pump your brakes up good until they get good and pressurized. But pretty much once you start feeling some good resistance on the pedal, where it's not going all the way to the floor anymore, it usually takes 10, 15, 20 pumps, then you should be good to go. So pretty much my brakes feel good and stout now. I'm confident that if I put it in gear, the car won't run away on me. So at this point, we're done with our brake job, and we pretty much saved at least $100 to $200. So there you go.